Sorry. So my name is Paul Murphy, and it's January the 11th, 2023. And this is the VDK community meeting. I'll go over the agenda now in 1 second. But if people want to introduce themselves, you don't have to, but if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Eva, and I am a maintainer of Versatile Data Kit.
Okay, I can go next. Hi, I'm Stanislav, or as my colleagues call me, Stanley. I'm also one of the maintainers of the VDK project and being part of VMware. That's me.
I can go. Go ahead, Gavi. Yeah, go ahead.
I've been with the VDK team for almost 2 years at this point, and yeah, that's it, I think.
Has it been 2 years, time wise? Okay.
Yeah, I started in April.
Yeah, I remember. Okay, my name is Dako, and I'm no longer the manager of the team, which uses VDK for the internal deployment at VMware. So yeah, I guess now I'm also a maintainer since I did a couple of changes last week. So yeah, that's me. I work for VMware as well.
Wait, who's managing now?
Radoslav.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Hi, my name is Agi, and I'm a community manager for VDK project.
And you're also cold.
Yes,
Okay.
but not winter, not like snowing outside.
Okay. Do we have someone else, or shall we continue with the agenda?
Yeah, we'll continue with the agenda. My name is Paul Murphy, and I'm maintainer on the VDK project as well. I've only been here, well, I've been here a good while at this stage, 4 or 5 months. So I'll just share my screen so that we can see the agenda. So the agenda today is to go over the latest release. I'll do a quick introduction to the control plane, to the control service. Eva is going to demo the current installation process. And then a discussion on the proposal to implement the 3-click rule will also be presented by Eva, make installation easier. And then we'll decide on the next date for the community meeting. So Stanley, maybe if you want to, first of all, go over the latest release.
Yeah, I'll do that. Let me share the screen. Okay, cool. I'm sure that you see my screen now. Yesterday, we made a release of VDK that we usually do a few days before the community meeting. This time, we have these 2 major features coming into the release. The first thing that we introduced, actually, I believe Dako was one of the people working on that, is the VDK troubleshooting plugin. Basically, the idea behind this plugin is to introduce an additional toolset that will enable the data jobs developers, or maybe admins, let's say, to have the options to get thread dump out of the running jobs. So basically, this is one additional toolset that would help debugging what happens during the execution of the data jobs. This is the high-level design. I will not get into details. Maybe at some point we'll make a more sophisticated introduction of this plugin, maybe in the context of the entire troubleshooting capabilities of VDK. But basically, this is a typical plugin that runs in the VDK container, and that is based on some configurations, can take the thread dumps and contact a pre-configured HTTP server or other endpoint and send those thread dumps to there that are available for the admin later on. Okay, so this was just a very quick introduction of this plugin. Next thing that we added into this release is, I don't think it is completed, but it is a huge step forward on supporting Python 3.11, basically on VDK core and some of the plugins around VDK. We already introduced the change. I think there's still some work to do to make it complete for all the plugins that we currently have in our repository. But this is future work that will be completed, I guess, in the next month or two. Okay, besides that, if you double check what have changed, actually we changed quite a nice number of stuff, mostly related to the stability of our CI/CD pipelines. Also, as usual, we are upgrading our dependencies to the latest good versions automatically, more or less. And as part of this process, actually, yeah, as I said, we introduce a lot of changes. So that's it about the latest version of VDK. If there are any questions, don't hesitate to contact us either on the Slack channels that we have expressed in our repo, or start discussions or anything. We'll be happy to answer those. Okay, Paul? I guess you're next.
Yep, absolutely. So I'm just going to do a quick intro to the control plane. So basically, as people know, there are VDK is split into roughly two kind of parts. There's the SDK and there's the control plane. And the SDK is like what we mostly focus on in like all our blogs, kind of all the discussions, because it's kind of the more tangible part for most people. It's focused on like connecting to database, templates for writing to databases or abstractions. All the plugins exist in the SDK. And often we kind of overlook the control plane and documentation, because I think, like, you know, when you're writing the job, that's the interesting part. Often people see getting something running stably as not so interesting. So like the control plane is responsible for that. It's responsible for running jobs and managing them. It's a service written in Java using Spring Boot. You can communicate obviously with it using the VDK CLI or HTTP requests. And importantly, like the control plane delegates like most of its work to Kubernetes. So there's not a huge amount of logic. If you want to dig into the control plane, there's not a huge amount of code or logic to become familiar with. It does delegate all the work to Kubernetes, so it's worth understanding. And as I was saying, like really, like most blogs focus on the SDK. So I'm just going to kind of go over how the control surface works here. So after you've written your job, you're happy with it, you've tested it locally and it works well, you now want to put it into production. That's where the control service comes in. Before you could deploy a job, if you wanted to deploy the job manually, you would need to package it yourself into a Docker image that could be deployed on Kubernetes, and then you would need to build those YAML files yourself. So that's what the control plane does. It also has authentication and the concept of like teams in it, so that teams can manage the same jobs together. So what I'm going to quickly do is demo just demo a deployment happening of a new piece of code, because I could go over the Swagger endpoints and stuff. That's stuff that's made to be explored yourself. I feel like what I can show here is actually running a job and looking at the pods creating and being destroyed in the Kubernetes cluster. So here I run our heartbeat job, which is going to basically test the entire control services pipeline. How it does that is it makes a new piece of code and asks the control service to deploy it. The first step the control service has to take is that it has to make a builder.
Oh, sorry to interrupt. Are you sharing the right screen?
So at the moment, you guys should be seeing lenses.
I think we see the other screen.
Yes.
Yeah. We see Outlook and backwalk, zero backwalk.
Oh, right. Sorry. I was doing. Oops. Sorry. And I'd made slides and all, and then they've just gone to waste.
Yeah, it's better.
Yeah. So as I was saying, the control plane is responsible for kind of the gritty pipe, like the nitty gritty of actually deploying a job and managing it and building it so that it can be run on Kubernetes. And then, so what I've done is I've started our heartbeat job pipeline, and just to show that it creates, in order to run a piece of code, you first of all need to build a pod or a Docker image that's compatible with Kubernetes for the code to run in. And so what the control service does first of all is it creates a builder image, which then builds the data job. And after the data job is done, it then schedules the data job to be run. So here we can see now then the data job which just built is now running. And so the control service provides a very clean abstraction on top of Kubernetes, which only focuses on the details that we need. And the Swagger docs are obviously extremely good for it, going into great detail, like how to access data jobs or properties or current executions or deployments. Does anyone have any questions? Was that helpful? Like maybe Aggie, or does it make sense?
Yep, thanks, Paul. That was really helpful. I think this is the first time we do share the control plane API. Maybe we have shared it before. I have certainly seen it. And I would like to share the screen and share with you. And let's imagine together. I hope you do see my screen. So let's imagine, let's feel what walking in the shoes of a data scientist, engineer, analyst is when coming into contact with a versatile data kit. A standard organizational or personal practices to review a new software product. And based on your experience, you form an opinion. Is it useful? Is it friendly to you? And what the cost is to start using it on your everyday basis, or for your organization to adopt it and incorporate it into the organizational processes. And this is usually dependent on the value that the software brings to you and to your organization as a product. So let's imagine you here for Versatile Data Kit for the first time, and you want to preview it locally and see for yourself. So I would look and for how to install the versatile DataKit components on my local machine. And currently, this is the link I get. That's the entry point to our GitHub repository. And I can see a landing page with the logo and a few visualizations that describe how the versatile DataKit can help you and your data or infra and DevOps team to optimize the work you do on an everyday basis. And then I get that versatile DataKit contains two components. The first one is a data SDK. It provides tools for automation, and the other one is the control service we just saw in the previous post demo. So I quickly understand that the control service is Kubernetes based. I think it would be helpful to have a data SDK client, maybe to imagine I already know that and have some context. So I guess I would start with the server side. It makes sense since you have a server and a client to approach the server first in order to evaluate the entire solution. So I would like to install the control service, and I scroll down to see what the installation looks like. And I can see nice instructions that seem to be Python. And again, this is for DataKit SDK. That's the first component. So I need to probably go to the installation page. So I will go and look for instructions for the control service, and I found those. So apparently I need to have Helm install, I need a Docker, and I need a kind implementation of Kubernetes. And this I do when I do VDK server install. So I have a MacBook, and unfortunately I still don't have installed VDK. So maybe I need that. So I get a step, the previous step. Oh, wait a minute. I need a Python environment in order to do so. And this is mentioned here previously with the installation of the previous component. So I will create one. And since I use PyEnv, I need to initialize just create an environment or start a new shell. And copy paste in this particular case, the commands needed to initialize, and then I can activate manually created Python environment and start using it. So I'm able to actually now install the prerequisites for the versatile DataKit SDK. And I need Quick Start VDK. The Quick Start VDK does contain a capability for you to bootstrap your local environment setup. So I installed it, and I'm getting back to let's see if it is the latest version. I would presume so. This is a way for you to upgrade it. If you find a new version is available, so then I can get back and install the VDK server. Oops, I missed something. That's the Helm installation, Docker and kind. I don't know if I have any, and I would guess that any data scientist or analyst wouldn't usually have Helm or Kind installed. Maybe Docker. Docker is a good way to go for like a general purpose activities. So for Helm, I have installed Helm already, so I can double check and verify. And for Docker, I go to the instruction page, I find from my operating system, and I have Docker installed. And also for Kind, I do have a Kind installation. And so what is going on then? What's happening with the command? There is a socket that needs to be listening, and apparently there isn't such. So it suggests the command. Here is the first gap that we may improve the documentation with, and I just know that I need a Docker running. So I will open start the Docker on my local environment, and that will unblock me with my local installation. So I'm letting the Docker to start and initialize, and I'm waiting for the splash screen to appear. And I think it's ready. I can verify that the listing processes in Docker is now successful. And let's try again installing VDK server now that we have the Docker started on my local machine. And observe what happens in the Docker desktop. We can see a few entries, a few containers starting up. And the first one is VDK control plane. I can see it initializing. And I can see there's some ports. So potentially I can connect to those. This is what I realized with just installing it on my local machine, that I should probably communicating with some of those ports listening. And I'm waiting for the command to complete. So it seems completed. Not quite. Oh, it's still installing prerequisite. At this point, I'm not quite sure how to proceed. Maybe getting started just to see my few steps in the beginning. How should I approach the control service? Let's find out. So I just click while installing to observe the statistics. Those are the local resources consumption. So I guess this is pretty fair for a standard machine to run it and evaluate locally the product. Also, I can notice that we have the VDK Docker registry and VDK Git server. So VDK Git server is a prerequisite for the control service. There you can find the data job sources being versioned. And this is done automatically by the control service used. So when you deploy and when you change and update your workload contents, it keeps an entry of each change with this Git server. And of course, you can configure it with an already existing external one, or with VDK Quick Start. It will install one by default for you, so you can quickly evaluate locally. The other container that is running is the VDK Docker registry. So there the data job images built are found. So the control service is actually operating those images built based on your sources and changes you make, and releases a new version according to your changes deployed to the control service. So now I would like to quickly click and see on any port. However, I get an error. Where should I look for the control service? It's not quite obvious at this point from the documentation, and maybe this is a point we can improve. However, if you take a close look, you can see that the installation does print an entry point for you. So I am just going to load it in the browser. And earlier you saw this Swagger interface, and this is the Swagger API the control service does provide for users to interact with. So now that I have the VDK client prerequisite installed for the control service, I am also suggested to actually create my first data job workload. So I will attempt to, and now I have a data job created in this directory matching the data job name I specified with the end parameter and the team name specified as well. And the P parameter is for path or where the data job is situated on your local file system. So in the example job directory are the data job sources populated from scratch, so you can browse them and see what templated sources used to quickly bootstrap you with the data job workload look like. So we have an SQL step to create a table, and we have a Python step that prints to the standard output, and then we ingest an object, a data object, and that's a dictionary with a key value pair. And we have the destination table specified. Well, that's interesting. I haven't installed database explicitly so far. However, I would presume this data job would work. So now that I have created it, there is another artifact worth mentioning, that is the key tab. The key tab is used to authenticate that you are the owner of the data job within the control service. So when I do VDK list, I can see this data job I created locally and in the cloud. And the cloud would be equivalent to my control service in kind Kubernetes installed locally.
Sorry, Eva, can I ask a question? I'm actually not that comfortable or familiar with the key tab stuff. So you have the key tab locally, and that lets the VDK CLI know that you own that job. Is that correct?
Yeah, and to answer better this question, in case you are familiar with Kubernetes, you can also take a look in your installation you made and browse the kind instance you have, and you can notice that there are a few artifacts already existing. So I will get back to this GitHub file in a minute. So first we have the deployment of the control service Kubernetes object present. Then we have the CockroachDB Kubernetes objects, the stateful set, CockroachDB initializer, and the pod running. So I have a CockroachDB instance. The control service needs one database to store the metadata with. So this job I listed that I just created, the control service is storing it using this CockroachDB instance. However, when you take a closer look within the hidden on first sight Kubernetes object, you can find there is a an example data job secret stored, and this Kubernetes object, secret object, contains the key tab you also have locally. So this, of course, is not needed for an end user. However, I wanted to provide some glimpse on what's happening under the hood and where the key tab is stored. So the key tab is sort of a credential entity, a credential unit. It could be looked as a token of a sort. So when I have the token myself, that means I am an owner of this data job, and I can schedule some executions in the cloud. So with this data job example, what can I do? I can run it locally and do VDK run and provide the data job path where the sources are looked. And then I just executed the data job locally within my local Python environment. That doesn't have any control service prerequisite for you to do so. So where is the data ingested then? Because I can see that I have successfully uploaded this payload I ingested in the Python step we reviewed a minute before. So I would presume at this point that we have an in-memory. If you take a look at the logs, maybe you can find out, yeah, it's VDK SQLite database. So VDK does that automatically for you by default. And you can, of course, connect to a variety of databases. So when I have the control service, I can create the data job. However, I can also deploy this data job and push the sources I have to the control service. And the control service is managing these sources, keeping track of them, keeping track of the changes, and updating the workload that lives in a highly available environment of Kubernetes. So when I close my computer, for example, this Kubernetes is living on my highly available infrastructure, let's say company or personal. So the data job scheduled, it could be repeated and executed independent from my local machine availability. So how do I do that? I want to deploy my data job, and I'll see the deploy command help. So I have an example. I will deploy my data job. I'll provide the name. I'll provide the team. I registered it with VDK create initially, and I will provide the path to the data job sources that are within the current directory. I need to provide a reason for my change. This reason, you can imagine, is kept tracked off within the Git instance in the form of a commit message. And you are invited by the command output to verify and double check what your deployment status is. So I will quickly check, and let's see what's going on under the hood. I have this pod that is starting to run that contains my data job name. So I actually I have this builder pod. So my data job is getting built. The sources are going into the Git server and the Docker image is being built and it's being registered within the Docker registry, a part of my local installation as well. So when this process completes, I can enlist and expect to find my deployment. And now I have my deployment available. I have the timestamp when I deployed it. I can pause this data job, suspend it temporarily. Currently it's enabled. And I have the data job name, and also this hash corresponds to the Git commit hash that corresponds to my particular change. So now that I have deployed my data job, I can expect for it to run the way it is scheduled. How do I schedule it? Along with the SQL and the Python step, I have the config ini and a couple of more files. The config ini does contain the schedule cron. This is a cron expression that would correspond to a particular point in time that could be repeating hourly on some period of time, or just be executed once. Usually the workloads are meant to be repeated on a particular interval. However, it's not a requirement. And this configuration I have by default with the data job template, I can see is used for under the hood from Kubernetes to schedule my workload. So this is when the data job is going to be executed for me. However, if I want to execute now, and the execution will not happen on my local environment. However, it will happen in the cloud or in where the Kubernetes and the control service lives. In this particular case, on my local machine, I can do VDK execute. And VDK execute, I can again provide the name of the data job, the team, and let's see the example. What else? Oh, I need to provide the start parameter because I want it to execute now. And we managed to execute data job, and I can track on my execution progress and fetch the status by using this command suggestion made by VDK output. And also I can again take a peek under the hood and see what a running data job is. And that would be my example job pod that is currently being executed. And I can also inspect the logs again using VDK. And the logs look very much like when you execute the data job locally in your local Python environment. Only now I make a request to the control service, and the control service is bringing the data job logs for me. So that's it with the control service installation demo. In the agenda, we stated that we want to investigate and decide and find gaps to ease people into installing the control service easier. So there are a lot of steps for a person to do, especially if the person doesn't have context of the prerequisites needed to do so, Helm, Docker, and so on. So I was thinking that we are already tackling this situation with the person. Gita may mention some of that effort. We will build this website, which we will provide better instructions for installing. So these instructions could be improved, and the person could have better snippets and better understanding on what the next steps are, even in advance, to have observability and even know how much time is needed to install locally, have some type of plan for installing and demoing locally, because currently it's unknown to the user unless the user performs the steps. And one effort could be dedicated to improving the documentation. However, another effort could be spent on having a way to download and start one deliverable artifact and have all of that start automatically for you, including those instances, Helm and Kubernetes, because a person may not need Kubernetes in his or her everyday work. And now I installed at least three softwares that I probably need to clean up after I review or something like that, because then my organizational infra team is going to take on and install this and provide a control service for me as a data analyst, for example. So I would really like to get your feedback. What do you think? Do you think it's worth it to have this embedded Kubernetes? I was imagining that a person could Google versatile data kit install and have a quick link for the control service image, let's say, and Docker would be the only prerequisite. So you pull the Docker image and you start the Docker image, and then you have the services installed. However, I'm not sure what do you think, guys?
So the Docker image actually has Kubernetes in it. Is that correct? So I don't understand if one single image would, one single Docker image. I get that it could have the control service in it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. I would imagine it would have everything necessary. In this particular case, we would need to embed Kubernetes. I am kind of used to this approach with a lot of software products. You can have an artifact downloadable and published with an embedded service that the software depends on. It could be a database, it could be server.
if that's something that's commonly done, I think that would be brilliant.
And then back to the agenda, we might have like optimize the user experience with installation, honoring the three-click rule. So when a person Googles and stumbles upon the versatile data kit entry point, you just have to click download and run, and that's it.
Yeah, to jump in to the discussion, I also believe this will be helpful. So all our efforts to improve the user experience when a new users come to VDK, of course, it's important, as Siva said, to update our documentation to guide the new users in a click and slick way, but also generally improving the workflow, making it really simple and intuitive. This is also a big task for us, and I think this three click installation rule is something that will guide us to this destination. So agree, yeah.
I want to just add from my personal experience, when I first time installed control service, it was not clear what now. Yeah, so somehow maybe some documentation also, I think it's really relevant to improve to, okay, so I installed and what now? And I have all these components, but I don't know actually also what's behind them. So I think this was very useful.
Perfect. I'm really glad to hear that, and I'm thinking that we may research on this topic and click around and see if we can come up with a way to optimize this and make it a better experience for the user that wants to quickly review the product locally and decide, have an opinion. Is it good? What value does it bring for him or the company he or her she is a part of?
So like, I think it's brilliant for someone who just wants to spin up everything if there's one Docker image. But like, say I have the control service running locally and I have my Kubernetes cluster locally, and it's very easy for me to investigate the stuff because, you know, it's actual Kubernetes cluster. If it's within the Docker image, will it become like extremely black box where it'll be very hard to kind of, because everything will be in the Docker image, would it be hard to debug issues? I don't know.
I think it needs to be both options. I mean, so
Both
the
options,
person
yeah.
can, decide.
Like anyone
which one.
running integration tests, I think anyone running integration tests wouldn't want to be using that packaged thing because I think it's too tightly packaged to like do an investigation into.
That's a very good point about the integration tests, and probably it is worth having this discussion. How many of us do run integration tests locally, and how many do rely on the CI/CD we have already in place? Because I can say from my personal experience, I usually tend to use the CI/CD because it's really convenient. You create a merge request, and the pipeline runs everything for you automatically. You can also quickly debug by taking a look at the CI/CD jobs in GitLab.
Like I do kind of agree with you, but you should still be able to run the integration tests locally.
Cool.
But I don't want to take away from the idea of packaging it at all. I think it would be a really good approach, but we would want, I think, me personally, I would want to install it the old way, because I'd want to be able to. Yeah, it's just a question. So when you're approaching it, I would like to take that package and see, can I kind of have visibility into the cluster? But I think it's a brilliant idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Paul, again, to jump in. So basically, the local development is crucial for fast iteration. So basically, a lot of folks usually develop locally, run on the IDE or something easy, develop some additional stuff. So basically, the system under test as well as the tests. So basically, both should work relatively easy and transparent for troubleshooting locally. So we'll preserve this for sure. It is something that will hit us very bad if we hide it behind the Dockerized environment. Of course, we can look into some kinds of hybrid variants to see what works best for both sides. But the idea, I think, is really good.
By the way, guys, if your idea is to have a data analyst, an easy way to just test the VDK, why don't you work on a WAP environment, something like a playground where there is preset data and a job, and you can just click, see how everything installs and play with some example data job.
Ivo, to jump in into this discussion as well. So, this is one of our, I would say, a bit future plans. It's something like a sneak peek, but basically we are working towards building a service like exactly like a playground that you said, that the people could be using, but this will come a bit later in time. And what we're currently discussing is improving our current state-of-the-art process. But it is a very good point. We're looking into this.
Okay.
Does anyone else have any questions? Obviously for Eva. If not, then I think we can just decide on the date for the next community meeting, and then we can wrap this up. So Aggie, maybe do you want to lead on this?
Yeah, I have suggested the 15th of February, and but because I'm not sure about the topic, I think for the next meeting, I don't know who, yeah, who should be there. So I just yeah, wanted to ask if there is a reason why not to do it on 15th of February.
If we're too drunk due to 14th of February, or I don't know whether you know, but in Bulgaria, people on 14th, if I'm not mistaken, are celebrating two things. So first is Saint Valentine's Day, and the other is Day of the Wine. I forgot what was the name.
Ah.
And so basically 14th is a hard day, but 15th should be kind of okay in the afternoon.
Okay, so I think we can keep it then.
Sure.
Yeah, that's it from my side.
I would also want to move it because it's too close to.
It's too risky.
It's okay. It can be informal, quite informal. We can have a chat.
Exactly. Okay, so let's set it for 15th of February. We have quite interesting topics in the pipeline. We'll sort out a few of them, and for sure it will be interesting next time.
Yeah, and definitely I will share about FOSDEM. So I'm going to FOSDEM in February and share what happened there in the next community meeting.
Well, I guess I'll stop the recording.